Hello. Well, as a writer, I have sometimes sent stuff into the Guardian and have been unsuccessful in getting anything printed there, with the exception of a couple of poems. However, I have now discovered what my problem was. I was using the wrong wordage. Because this guy, he's got this farrago of total bollocks in the Guardian, and he did it with these words, didn't he? That's the open sesame of how to get stuff in the Guardian. You use white privilege, and immediately the copy editor, who's about 12 years old, or at least mentally 12 years old, looks at that article and thinks, ha ha, yes, white privilege, we've got to print this. Okay, the journalist's Western links made him the focus of world attention. Actually, he's a journalist. That's why the world's press are getting so exercised about it. They don't mind other people getting killed, but when one of their own gets killed, that's something else. Then this man starts. Oh yeah, I'm assuming it's a man. Oh, maybe I'm guilty of sexism there. Khalid, that's a man's name. Okay, he's a black man, so listen to him. Now, so Sudan, a country that's both located in Africa and part of the Middle East. Actually, no. You may like to say you're partially in the Middle East, but no, the only reason the Sudan is part of the Middle East is because the Arabs have spent so much time raping and raiding there that there's some Arab blood in there. It's still Africa, and that's all there is to it. I carry the baggage of one of the most complicated areas in the world. I don't think it's complicated. You may think it's complicated. As far as I'm concerned, it's a failed area ruled by warlords and corrupt semi-officials, and there's nothing at all complicated about that. You can't get your act together, mate. That's all. That's according to the Western narrative. No, the Western narrative is that it's not complicated. It's filled with a bunch of hooligans, as if the West were not one of the main complicated factors in the reason. As a matter of fact, I read an article about somebody else who'd worked at Peace Corps or some sort of voluntary organisation, and he said the Sudanese who were outside the country did very well, but when they were inside the country, they couldn't run businesses or even government departments because they were expected to employ their relatives. And of course, this caused trouble, economic trouble. You can't run an economy like that. But most of the people I know back home can perceive white privilege and agree with that mentality. I don't actually know what that means. You don't perceive white privilege. You simply imagine it. You're doing this to yourselves. When they see what's become of our region post-colonialism, they take on the Western narrative too. Yeah, now, will you explain to me why Britain did not become a colony of the Sudan? Why the Sudan became a colony of, I don't know, whoever was in charge of it? Because you couldn't field an army of sufficient sophistication to go to Britain and conquer the British. You couldn't even field an army of sufficient sophistication to fight off the British, even though the British were at the ends of their supply lines with just a few men, relatively a few men. In addition to the everyday bragging from the older generation about how things were better back then, they probably were, and how working for the Khawaja, in that context white man, I looked up Khawaja on Wikipedia. Let's have a look. I'll move this in. Khawaja, Persian, is an honorific title used across the Middle East. Now, why do you think you have a Persian word for people to be respected. Because your country was raided by people from the Middle East for centuries. And it was probably a blessed relief when the British turned up, because at least they didn't take away your males and castrate them. I remember an article widely circulated on WhatsApp that openly called for the British to come back and save us from ourselves. Yeah, they might very well have been able to do that. Not now, though. It argued that the most functioning structures in post-colonial societies are the ones that were erected during colonialism. And so they were, because you couldn't get your act together. Now, look, I understand that years of slave raids and battles have fragmented your society. There's a reason why you're in pieces like this. I understand that. But it's not white privilege. You have to be responsible for your own privilege. You write stuff like this in The Guardian, giving yourself excuses. With the help of the... Now let's have a look at this. With the help of the prosperity it has hoarded from its gruesome past. What are you talking about here? 2 world wars and providing its citizens with a whitewashed version of history, blinding them to Western states' manipulation of third world countries and support of authoritarian governments. The post-colonial West was able to rebuild its idea of itself as the self-righteous protector of human rights, free speech and democracy. Where do you start with this? The British spent far more on their colonies than they ever got from them. And in the case of slavery, the British Navy was almost exclusively devoted at great cost to the British Empire to the destruction of the slave trade. The British Navy had ships all over the high seas, all over the world, arresting slavers. How dare you say the help of the prosperity it's hoarded from its gruesome past? It has a gruesome past. Sudan has a bloody gruesome present. Stop shouting at us and look to yourself. 2 world wars bankrupted the British Empire, fighting for what they saw was right. What the hell are you talking about? I believe this is one of the main reasons for the rise of young white nationalists who imagine that the white race is superior because it has single-handedly made the world a better place. Look, the white races have made the world a better place. They have. Or rather, the countries that the white race is founded. That is not to say that other countries have not made contributions as well. But look at all the things that have come out of countries where the predominant ethnic origin of the people is white. Let's go through the list of motor cars, penicillin, MRI scanners, telephones. None of these were African inventions. They weren't even Chinese inventions. And the Chinese are, by all accounts, pretty bright, aren't they? Stop complaining about what you have. The fact that you could print this up on a computer and send it, probably, yeah, I understand this guy is based in Holland or somewhere. It says at the bottom here. Yeah, Denmark. You sent this to The Guardian by email, didn't you, dearie? Long before the refugee crisis that swept Europe after the Arab Spring, most artists, intellectuals, freethinkers, opposition and journalists from the third world had, like me, headed west, not only for education but for protection. Aha! For protection, because the Sudan's a shithole. To be protected by white privilege. You ungrateful bastard! You're in Denmark, drinking Nespressos, going down to your local bakery and picking up a croissant or 2. And you are complaining about being protected by white privilege. Bugger off back to Sudan. So most of us end up living between a rock and a hard place. No, you're living in a very soft place. Mr. Al-Bayi. You're living in a lovely place. Denmark is heaven on earth. And they are giving you the benefit of their laws, which they came up with for the protection of the citizen. If you can't manage to do that in the Sudan, that's the problem of the Sudanese culture. What, do you want them in Denmark to be divided up and shooting it out with warlords here and there and no law anywhere? Yeah, is that what you want? That's not white privilege, that's organisation. Do we stay home to be threatened by authoritarian regimes? Those regimes didn't come from nowhere, you know. They came from you. And not have full independence of freedom? Or do we try to get the West to be free, but become a poster child for how good the West is? Yes, yes, and yes. Anyone who comes to the West and thrives there is a poster child for the West and should be glad to be so, even though it supports the very authoritarian regimes that suppress us by selling weapons and more. Maybe. And you think in the Sudan you wouldn't do the same thing in the same position? And they don't always support these regimes either. I mean, when they went into Serbia to protect the Muslims, by the way, they were trying to solve a problem there, weren't they, the West? Oh, but that's not good enough for you, is it? The extent of the power of white privilege. Oh, you keep on repeating that, don't you? Even if only by saying, oh, yeah, you can't prove it, but you can associate it, like somebody's cousins, brothers, aunts, or whatever, are somehow connected. Yeah, of course. The extent of the power of white privilege, even so, came as a surprise to most world leaders who were pressed into taking action following the murder of Saudi Washington Post journalist, who is not even an American citizen, as Trump said during a press conference. They raised the question. People like that are murdered horribly in the Sudan every day. Nobody in the Sudan raises even a finger because it's just not worth it, is it? While the Saudi regime imprisons thousands of nameless dissidents and kills thousands in Yemen. As a matter of fact, here, this article was amended on 27th of November. The war in the Yemen caused thousands of deaths, not millions, as an earlier version said. Okay, so the fact that this article was amended on 27th of November because he said millions had been killed shows exactly his attitude of exaggeration. Oh yeah, we know the Yemen war is a dreadful war, but the fact that you think it's millions shows where your brain is. There are thousands of Khashoggis out there, working, dying, but none will count like he did. Yeah, because they weren't working for the Washington Post. And that's the top and bottom line. It's nothing to do with white privilege, it's journalist privilege. But what the focus on him did achieve, thanks to his associated white privilege. You can't call him white, but because he hung around with white guys, he has associated white privilege. Like you. There are still thousands of people being killed horribly in the Sudan, your birthplace, sir. A place where the local people can't get their act together. A place where the local culture is corrupt at its very inception. That's what you should be shouting about. Just the white people happen to have got it right, mostly. And next to you, practically perfect. But of course, The Guardian. Oh, The Guardian loves to print this stuff, doesn't it? I'm very grateful for financial contributions. But if you don't want to give money, you can still help a lot by sharing this and other videos I've made. Also, remember to check your subscription from time to time, as sometimes subscriptions get erased for one reason or another. Till next time.